It's time to review some 2025 property predictions. I'm going to be reviewing my own predictions as well as the real estate experts, because some of the big banks have been forecasting what's going to happen across Australia's major capital cities. And you might be thinking about investing in Brisbane or in Melbourne or in Perth at this point in time. So let's see what the experts are saying and break down, is it a good time to invest in 2025? Is there going to be some strong growth if the RBA cuts rates this year? Or is it a time to sit on your hands and maybe save some cash, get some buffers in place and look to build in the future? So Queensland's tipped to be one of the nation's property powerhouses. Property prices in regional Queensland are set to explode in 2025, with one major city set to see the nation's biggest price jump amid forecasts it will grow by a massive 30%. 30% in 1 year is crazy. While Brisbane will continue to see gains in the property market this year, with prices tipped to grow by 10%, it is outside the state's capital that sellers are expected to see some gains. Townsville, which has finally shaken off the effects of mining downturn and floods, it's a pretty big point there, is poised to lead the nation in house price growth, with 2025 property market outlook report from Propertyology predicting prices to boom by a whopping 20 to 25%. Across all Australia, the best performed market for 2025 calendar year is expected to be Australia's 14th largest city, Townsville, Propertyology founder and head of research Simon Presley said. At the other end of the spectrum, Australia's two largest cities are expected to be among the nation's worst performers. Both Sydney and Melbourne are likely to produce mild declines in real estate values. Now, isn't that interesting? There's speculation that Townsville might be a booming location this year in 2025. Now, some of the concerns with Townsville is, where's that booming happening? Is it out in the suburbs or is it in towards the water, in towards the centre of town? Townsville is one of those areas with very high insurance premiums, higher crime. As it said in the article, floods, mining downturns. There's a lot to factor in there if you're looking to buy in a location like Townsville. But before we unpack a little bit more about Sydney and Melbourne, let's see what some other forecasters like ANZ are saying about the property market this year. So this graph shows ANZ Research expects housing prices to rise by 2.7% in 2025. And now this is a pretty basic graph, but it shows 2021, 2022, 2023, close out of 2024, 2025, and 2026. Now, the interesting thing here is you can see the massive growth in 2021, somewhere between 15 and 30%. So if you were like me and you were able to buy a couple of properties before 2021, you would have seen some massive growth off the back of COVID. But now you're seeing more normalized growth numbers, somewhere between 5 to 10%, and it's different across each of those major capital cities. If you look at Perth, it didn't have as much growth during the pandemic, but then it had some really strong 2023 and 2024 growth. 2025, depending on who you're asking, Perth could be up between, say, 8%, and some forecasters are saying up to 20%, which is crazy in my opinion that it could go up 20%, but it may well do that. If you look at Adelaide, similar forecasts, 2024 close to 15%, but 2025 not forecast to be anywhere near as strong, around 4 to 5%. Brisbane forecast from ANZ around that 6% mark. Then you've got Melbourne and Sydney with no to low growth, depending on what you're looking at there. And then Australia-wide, that's where they get that 2.7% number. So it's averaging out all those locations and all that potential growth. You can see there's almost nothing forecast for Hobart, Canberra, and Darwin moving forward. Now, this graph on screen is the other graph you might have been seeing on YouTube or news articles as well. And this one is from SQM Research, which is a really reputable data house with some pretty wild predictions as well. This is where I saw the 20% uplift as well. So Perth is tipped somewhere between, depending on a bunch of different scenarios, whether there's no rate cut, whether there's a rate cut in March, and then it looks at some population growth numbers as well. In each of these scenarios, it gives you a hypothetical. So in a no rate cut scenario, you've got the potential of, say, 7 to 11% in Perth, 5 to 9% in Brisbane, Darwin 3 to 7, Melbourne -7 to -3, Sydney -8 to -4 in that scenario, Adelaide 4 to 8%, Hobart and Canberra, not a lot of movement there as well. Now, the interesting thing is, Perth's been spruiked as an investment spot, which is fine. Lots of people want to buy there because it was rising. Now, the question is whether that's getting too hot, essentially. You're buying at the end of that cycle. Remains to be seen. Brisbane's gone through a cycle, and I think it's about to go through its next cycle over this next 6-7 years out towards the Olympic Games. So it depends. What are you investing for? Are you investing for the 2025 boom and bust report? Or are you investing for 3, 5, 7 years? Now, some people will argue you need to invest for the next year because if you don't get that strong equity growth, you can't refinance, pull the money out and go again. Well, my playbook is a little bit different. I'd prefer to buy with the longer term fundamentals with that strong growth horizon. Brisbane's grown, say, 8 to 9% a year over a 30-year time horizon. In my opinion, Brisbane's primed for some growth over the next 3, 5, 7 years. And so I'd much rather buy with the mid-term perspective than a short-term perspective. Because if you buy with a short-term perspective and you buy Perth, it might go up 15%, but then it might be stagnant in the next 5, 6, 7 years. Now, this is all hypothetical. That's the idea of real estate investing, is you need to work out what the right location for you to buy. And I've put a lot of my eggs in the Brisbane basket, so you need to take everything I say with a grain of salt. So I've got 4 houses here in Brisbane spread across Moreton Bay Council, Brisbane City Council, and Logan City Council. And I also own property in New South Wales in a major regional town like Coffs Harbour. Now, it's interesting that one of the articles was talking about Townsville being the biggest boom this year. But again, is Townsville primed for growth over a mid-term, long-term perspective, or is it short-term speculative trading? It depends what type of investor you want to be, whether you go that short-term speculation and try and harvest equity that way, or how I like to do it is buy with the mid-term, long-term perspective, buy safe as houses in a capital city with 2.5 million people, or buy in a location like Coffs Harbour where they've got multiple diverse economy and over 100,000 people in that local area. So as long as you're ticking those major boxes and you've got your strategy in place, that's okay. That's where you go out and make that investing decision. Not everyone's going to want to buy in Perth or in Brisbane. You might want to try and buy counter-cyclically. So Melbourne's quite an interesting one. Sydney's also quite interesting. I think there's a lot of chatter on YouTube and online about Melbourne being the spot. Melbourne's going to draw back and then it's going to go again. Well, Sydney, in my opinion, if it has a pullback, it's always going to be the most expensive place to buy in Australia. So if you can buy something scarce, although it might cost you $1.5 million, that's where you have to be able to try and balance the cash flow as you build out a property portfolio. If you do go into Sydney or Melbourne, you need a lot of money. You can't go in there with a $500,000 budget or an $800,000 budget. And so that's why I find it really interesting when people are debating about Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane and Perth. Brisbane, Perth and Adelaide are going to be far more affordable as major capital cities. Even though Brisbane, for example, might have a higher median house price, you can still buy cheaper properties in Brisbane. We can help clients buy good quality houses for, say, $700,000 to $900,000, whereas you can't get that in Sydney and Melbourne. You're out in the new build estates on 200 square meters of land in Melbourne or Sydney on those types of properties. You probably can't even buy a house even on 200 square meters in Sydney for $700,000 to $900,000. So it's really interesting taking a look at what SQM is saying, what ANZ's been forecasting, what the realestate.com article, Simon Presley's talking about Townsville this year. It's really interesting seeing those dynamics play out and these forecasts again. I want to run my numbers off 8%. That's what I like to run my numbers off as a healthy forecast of what the capital growth might be in a given year, because that's where the long-term averages lie. And when you buy a property, I like to force value. I don't like to sit on my hands and just do nothing. I don't want to wait for the market, in my opinion. That's why my YouTube channel has been about real estate, renovating, and then financial freedom. So look at your own journey. Look at the ways that you can do that. Now, if you want to work with me and buy a property here in Brisbane, we can help you through every step of that process. So it's myself and 6 staff members here on the ground. We are a boots on the ground local area expert team. And you get to work with me directly. You get my mobile, my email address, and the team are there to facilitate the process. We even have some partnerships out there. So we've got our mortgage broker, Nevada, from Cube Home Loans, and you can find his link in the description. And we've also got our project management team, which we can outsource to if you're looking to do a cosmetic renovation, and they'll give you a price up front to take an ugly duckling and bring it back to life. And that renovation will not only increase the rent, but increase the market value of the property, allow you to potentially refinance and pull some more equity out, and then look at going again if you have the serviceability. So you need that mortgage broker like Nevada from Cube Home Loans. You need the right team on the ground if you're going to find and search for the right property, which is where Purpose Property comes in. And if you're going to tackle a renovation to force and manufacture value, again, you need the right team there in terms of renovations. So if you're interested in buying a property here in Brisbane, make sure you head over to purposeproperty.com.au to book in a free chat with myself. So what do I think? What do I think is going to happen in 2025 in the property market? I think it does come down to that rate cut, whether we get a rate cut in March or in May. I think that is going to fuel the property market again. And the RBA is incentivized, and the Australian government is incentivized to keep property prices ticking up and up over time. If the property market was to go backwards, they would lose gross domestic product. They'd lose people wanting to be or do activities in the Australian market. The Australian government doesn't really care about you or me. They more care about the economy. They more care about the cycle and the flow of money through the system, because they make money as money flows through, and they're judged on the turnover that happens in Australia's economy. So what the government is incentivized to do is to make sure that money keeps flowing, and that you go to work and that I go to work, and that we keep, channeling goods and services between each other. So I can't see the Australian government not allowing the property market based on the policies that are in place and based on the decisions that the RBA might make this year. That property will continue to grow over that mid to long term. And this year, in terms of short-term growth, I think it's still the minor capital cities that are front runners. I think if you want to speculate, you can go to places like Townsville, but that's not for me. I bought in a major regional town like Coffs Harbour, but that wasn't a speculative play. That was, again, a mid to long-term play, looking at that northern New South Wales region, looking at Coffs Harbour, having an airport, being a hub, and that's why we bought in that location. And the reason I have a large amount of my wealth and a large amount of properties in Brisbane is the trajectory out towards 2030 and 2032. I actually have some plans to sell 1 or 2 properties in the next 5 to 6 years to liquidate, take some of that cash out of the Brisbane market and move it into other assets, which we'll share on the YouTube channel in the future. So what's your outlook for 2025? Where will you be buying? I'd be interested to hear in the comments below. And YouTube also thinks you'd really like this video just here, so make sure you give that one a click. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.